There is a high stakes debate going on in Washington, D.C., on the airwaves, behind the scenes, and probably in the Oval Office itself. Everybody is trying to convince President Trump that their side is right and that he either needs to A, attack Iran and destroy the regime, or B, don't attack and continue going on with some sort of diplomacy. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcome couldn't be more important to American national security, regional security in the Middle East, that could radically transform everything that we know right now. It could totally upend it if we take this action, or if we don't. If we continue on with the status quo, then what we already know will continue on. Things can continue with no one dying, with no one's security being upset. That's certainly what I'm advocating for, and what we're trying to, on our part, to do to convince President Trump in our ways to take that course of action, because that is absolutely, in my mind, unequivocally the best course of action that is supported by evidence and rational and logic. That's the way it should go. Definitely, I'm not the only voice here. There are a lot of others that are weighing in on this, and we're going to show you some of them today. But we're going to start off with one of the things that's different about this, or at least what's on the table, and this has to be factored into any decision, go or no go, for President Trump, and that is the likely reaction of the other side of this, Iran and the Ayatollah himself.
In the past, Americans repeatedly made threats in their statements, saying that all options are on the table and all options include the option of war. Now, this man also keeps claiming that they have sent aircraft carriers and so on. In my view, the Iranian nation should not be frightened by such things. The people of Iran are not influenced by this kind of talk. We are not the initiators of war. We do not want to oppress anyone or attack any country, but in response to anyone who seeks to attack, the Iranian nation will deliver a strong blow. Americans should also know that if they start a war this time, it will be a regional war.
So that last part there is what's gotten a lot of people's interest. If the United States starts a war this time, he distinguishes from last year in 2025, in June 2025, this time there'll be a regional war, which means that they'll respond. If you look at some of the other comments by Arakchi and some of the other IRGC leaders, they say they will attack both Israel and American targets in the region. So they will make it a regional attack in the event that we initiate going in. That is different. President Trump was asked about that not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I think, initially, and he just kind of dismissed it initially. It just says, oh, no problem. That's what they said before, they weren't going to do it. That's what he said a couple of weeks ago. But yesterday, he was asked specifically about the Ayatollah's comment, also yesterday.
The Supreme Leader today said that U.S. attack could spark a regional war. Giving you response to that, sir?
Why wouldn't he say that? Of course he would say that, but we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, a couple of days, and hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
Yeah, see, that worries me because his comments there are pretty flippant. Well, we'll see if we get a deal. If we don't get a deal, then we'll find out if he's right. Meaning that if I don't get the deal I'm looking for, President Trump says, then he's right. There's going to be an attack, and then we'll find out. It sounds to me like that President Trump is ready to test him, to say, I'm going to call your bluff. Are you going to have a regional war or not? That's not a really good thing to do, because you're gambling not with just some action. You're gambling with the lives of American troops. You're gambling with the lives of Israeli citizens. Because if he does what he says he's going to do and attacks both Israel and the United States, then people will die on each of those targets who are alive right now. So that's a big gamble that the president is willing to take. But he's also hasn't pulled the trigger yet. There was a lot of evidence, and I did a show over the weekend, that it looked like some of the evidence was out there that he had already made the go decision. They were waiting for things to happen. It's the second time this has happened. The first one happened on the 14th of January, and then the second one happened over the weekend. And it looked like the signal said that he was ready to go, but something happened in each case to make him want to change his mind. What we are told in the first one was that many of the military people, and maybe even Benjamin Netanyahu himself, said, hang on before you start this, because if they do what they say and they actually attack Israel and other American bases in the area, we're going to need more combat power. So that was why this whole armada was shipped there, and it waited until it got on side. There was also additional air power that was brought in, air defense power that was brought in to bolster all the things in the region there. Well, that came to fruition over the weekend. Everything came on side, and it looked like they were ready to go again. But now all of a sudden it didn't. Now I have on good authority from somebody well-placed in the Department of Defense that the decision has not been made yet, and that over the weekend that the president apparently is, I won't say waffling, but is unsure. And we want to reinforce that uncertainty as opposed to those who are trying to push him into certainty to launch the attack. And let's just get into this, because there are a lot of people that are pushing really hard for President Trump to take the gamble, to take the risk, and to go ahead and launch an attack. Now, literally moments ago, just before we came on the air here, President Trump retweeted, retruthed, I guess, on his Truth Social, a segment from an interview that was on Fox News last night with Trey Gowdy and one of the spokespersons, so I think it was for the State Department, which I hope is not indicative of where his mind is right now, because if that's the case, then it looks like some of these war advocates are starting to succeed. Here's what he retweeted.
I see people on both sides of the political aisle kind of light their hair on fire over this phrase regime change, like it's somehow a pejorative. I mean, we make changes every 2 years in this country. We change leaders every 4 or 8 years at the very top. If Iran is the head of the snake, and so many people have said that it is, why keep current leadership?
Well, ultimately, the president is focused on our national interests, those national interests that he's outlined. He has a very clear message for the regime: no nuclear weapons, stop killing protesters. And the president has shown that he is willing to talk to anyone when it is in our national interest to do so. So the president has been very clear about what he's looking here from the regime. He's been clear he wants to see the regime make a deal. We have this maximum pressure policy in place. The president, again, focused on our national interests, making sure that America is secure, our allies are secure. That's what the president is always focused on, and this is no exception here.
I mean, let's just start off with the elephant in the room here, with Trey Gowdy starting the conversation off by saying, what's the big deal about regime change? I mean, we do it all the time. We have an election every 2 years, every 4 years, every 8 years. We change leaders all the time. What's the big deal? Okay, we don't do it at the end of a barrel of a gun. No one from the outside is threatening to destroy and kill whoever's in office to get somebody else in office. That's a little bit different. And yet he actually says, you know, with this whole incredulous look, like, what's the big deal? And then he also suggests that it's literally our call to make what some foreign country does. Now, we've already shown that that's what he did in Venezuela. He made it his call. President Trump did. That's his decision, whether he claims that Maduro was a legitimate leader or not. Since he declared not, then he could just say, I'm going to send combat power down there, kill 80 people in the process, and just snatch him and throw him into jail in New York City. And so apparently that's still on the table here, and that mentality is, because you hear the comments even by the State Department spokesperson, Tommy, that, look, hey, if President Trump decides it's in America's national interest to kill the leader of Iran or to blow them up, that's great. And that's what he'll do. And if he can get a negotiation, if he can get what he wants, you know, that's great too. We'll have to wait and see. And of course, as we've talked about many times, the terms that are being offered, at least what's being publicly offered, are just absolutely impossible. Iran has to get rid of its long-range ballistic missile program. They have to halt all their nuclear enrichment, and they have to end support for all of their groups, regional armed groups in the region, which that's literally all of their national defense. So there's no way they're going to do that. So then the question is, if they don't do that, what then is the president going to do? Now, here are some of the folks that are just absolutely doubling down over this weekend, especially really pressing hard against President Trump to take that risk. And we're going to start with one of President Trump's former national security advisors, deputy advisor, Victoria Coates, who's like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. Definitely do it.
Obviously, everyone would prefer diplomacy. This has been on offer for the Iranians for over a year now. They didn't have to have the 12-day war in June, which they lost by every conceivable metric, disastrously for them. And so if they're now in a condition where their economic mismanagement, the disaster that's going on in that country is so severe that they're actually willing to make significant concessions to the United States, particularly on the nuclear file, there's no harm in having a discussion about that. We now have a president who has demonstrated, not just through Midnight Hammer, but also through absolute resolve, the action against Maduro in Venezuela, that he is willing to use American strength when it is necessary, particularly in a targeted way that changes the conditions on the battlefield.
Okay, let's start off with that comment there. Economic mismanagement. So apparently economic mismanagement by a regime is grounds to be removed by force and killed. I guess we should be worried about that just on its surface. But I mean, I'm just saying this out loud just to show how absurd this is. You're saying economic mismanagement that led to protests, therefore we can go in and kill them. I mean, let's be frank and very clear here. This economic mismanagement, there may well be some. I think that there's good evidence to suggest that they don't do a very good job. But it's also true that the majority of the problem here with this economic mismanagement is because of the sanctions that we are trying to crush that country and have been for a long, long time, decades, but in their last few years, even more so. We are doing everything we can to destroy their economy, everything we can to sabotage their currency, and cause hyperinflation and just completely wreck it so that we can cause disruption inside that can cause people to rise up so that we don't have to worry about sending troops on the ground, that we can get them to do our dirty work on the ground inside of Iran against the regime. Then we'll come in with some combat power when it's teetering and see if we can just knock it over. That's the reality of what we're talking about here. And it just irks me a lot when the likes of Victoria Coates or all these people put this, this moral sounding words on top, like we actually care about the people on the ground. We don't care anything about the Iranian people. Let's just be clear about that. None of these people I'm going to show you here give a damn about the people on the ground in Iran. They only care about them insofar as that they can use them as pawns, hoping that they'll get killed, being happy to promote that when the regime overreacts and does kill them, which is of course wrong, categorically wrong, but you want that to happen and you celebrate it when it does, because then that can give justification to the American people to why we're going to go in. Absent that, it's a lot harder of a sell. This is all about selling it to the American people. So they're trying to make it palatable for the American public so that then they can make it palatable for President Trump. Now, he doesn't seem to be convinced so far, because apparently he is not convinced that there's not too big of a military risk. That's what we need to reinforce here, because he's completely right there. One of the other things that Victoria Coates is trying to convince President Trump also, and many others, is that there was success in Venezuela and there was success at Operation Midnight Hammer. So we have shown all this power. Let's be clear about that too. Now, everybody in the administration has been bragging about itself, about how great our military power is, how no other country on the planet could do all this kind of stuff. But let's be clear about what actually did happen. You're talking in both cases about an operation. A few hours of time in both cases, maybe less than few, maybe it's like a couple hours. In both cases, Operation Midnight Hammer was not a 12-day war. That's what the Israeli side was fighting with Iran. It was about a 2-hour operation for the United States, where we took very low risk and used a lot of missile power to hit a bunch of targets, and then that was it. We were out. Same thing in Maduro, in Venezuela. We had a lot of combat power in the area, but we didn't use it. We had a lot of splashy stuff, and I think a lot of those explosions were genuinely meant for the splashiness to show on camera to make it look impressive. But really, we had inside help, and so that we were able to snatch and grab Maduro with remarkable success, because it was facilitated the inside. The air defenses systems were either turned off, or the target coordinations were given, so that we were able to take those things out. Virtually none of them operated. In fact, I think none of them operated, not virtually, but I think none of them operated. So other than a few small arms fires with some of the helicopters, There wasn't any anti-aircraft fire. So something was done on the inside to make sure that didn't happen. So our actual attack was very low risk, very short duration, in, out, and we're done. That's not what would happen here. And it looks like Iran is saying, we're going to make sure that that's not the case this time, and we're ready to send it out. I think that it was Arakchi has said, the foreign minister for Iran, that there won't be some symbolic strike. Any strike at all will immediately launch all of our countermeasures, because it sounds to me like they're saying, we recognize that this will just keep going on forever. I mean, it started off with Trump assassinating Soleimani in 2020, all kinds of assassinations by the Israeli side, the destruction of their embassy, the assassination in Tehran, and then, of course, the attacks that happened in 2025, the 12-day war in 2025. It sounds like that they're done with it. They're saying, you start one now, you're going to feel it too. We'll see if they make good on it. But Victoria Coates is sitting there saying, everybody wants diplomacy, and we'd all like to have a negotiated settlement, but would we? Because Jack Keane doesn't seem to think that there should be any negotiations.
If we go and make a deal with the Iranians today, what are we really doing? We're extending the life of the regime. We're extending it. We're throwing them a lifeline. And it's a gut punch to the protesters. There is an historic opportunity here to set the conditions through a military strike that puts the regime on the pathway to collapse. The Israelis recognize this, and this is why there's so much delay taking place to bring in robust resources to do something that's decisive. It's not going to be like an invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, or Haiti, or Panama, where there are ground troops on. There's always going to be a degree of uncertainty to it.
Yeah.
But we have to use our judgment and President Trump's instincts here, and also some spine, dealing with that ambiguity. But we know for a fact that based on what events are in front of us, the regime is the weakest it's ever been.
So you had Victoria Coates there, a former Trump National Security Council advisor, deputy National Security Advisor, somebody he's worked with. And she's saying, definitely can go and do this. No problem. And now here is again on Fox News, knowing that Trump watches Fox News all the time. So this is directly, intentionally for him to communicate to Trump to try and assuage him. Here's a 4-star general saying, we can't do diplomacy because they won't live up to it anyway. It would be dumb. Don't do that. And then he insults our intelligence by saying a diplomacy, that would be a gut punch to those people who have been protesting. Those people who are protesting, by the way, the ones who were not actually agitated specifically by, external forces, but the ones who were indigenously actually protesting because they're unhappy, they don't want a regime change and a destruction of their country. They want to have a good economy. They want to have a good life. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want to be able to eat. They want to have a life. They want the situation fixed. Now, of course, there are many that do want the regime out. No, I'm not pretending it's not. But to suggest that they don't want any diplomacy, everybody would like to have an improved situation without having a lot of people kill their own countrymen and their own the armed forces destroyed in the process. That's something that Jack Keane wants. That's something that the Israelis want. That's something that a lot of these warlusters, they would love it because they want the destruction. They want people to be killed. And here's part of the problem with that is that they don't know what they want to come next. They just want the destruction and the death, and then we'll figure it out after that. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But one of the other things that I hope President Trump would hear, here is Jack Keane saying, you got to have a little spine. You got to take a little bit of risk. And then he says, of course, this wouldn't be like Iraq or Afghanistan or Somalia or some of the Panama, some of these other places where we had troops on the ground. So he's saying, let's just use some firepower, choose a lot of this massive armada that Trump loves to use that phrase. Let's use a lot of air power, a lot of missile power, kill a bunch of people, blow stuff up, and then the people will rise up and they'll turn against the regime, and we'll have a regime change that way. But you're going to have a little spot. If you don't send ground forces in, listen to me, the regime has all the power. They have all the guns. The protesters have their bodies only. And they have already risen up. Some claim it's as many as 30,000 have been killed. We don't know what the number is, but the regime itself has admitted thousands. So it is a big number. But the regime still has the weapons. So you go in there and you blow up a bunch of stuff. You're not going to damage the economic and the military architecture of the country and its ability to hold people accountable. You're not going to take away their guns. You're going to blow some stuff up. But the country is 3 or 4 times bigger than Iraq, folks. It is spread out over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. They know what's been coming on. They know what the threat is. So they have dispersed a lot of their combat power all over the place. They're going to make it hard for anything to get hit. They have a lot of experience in 2024 and 2025 directly with the United States and Israel, and they know what to expect. We have hardened them for that. We have shown them, here's what we can do. And so they figured out how to disperse and survive it. So their objective here, and understand the objectives of the two sides. For the U.S. to succeed, they have to have regime change. They have to destroy the regime, and they have to have the people rise up, because we're not sending any boots on the ground. So we're relying on these people with no weapons, whatever they can steal and scrounge. Apparently it's not very much, to be able to rise up, even though they don't have the power to do so. And you're just hoping that that works out. But there's no evidence that it's going to work out. And as we see, that's the military guy sitting here telling you, have some spine. You got to take a little risk, even though we don't have an army on the ground that can do it. So you go and blow a bunch of stuff up that they'll be expecting and they're prepared for, and they have continuity of government plans for, they have replacements, etc. All the Iranians have to do is not lose. All they have to do is to continue to be viable. And if we fail, then what are you going to do? You're going to go in with an army then? If the people don't rise up, because you get more of them shot and slaughtered because they try and rise up, and again with insufficient firepower, and then the regime security forces send them down again. I mean, how many people are you going to sacrifice? And when that doesn't work, then what? But even if it did, here's the shocking part. Real quickly, one of the big problems with the 2003 invasion into Iraq, that was, routinely, everybody understood that one of the biggest failures of the United States is we didn't have a then what plan. So once Saddam fell, we didn't really have a plan for what came next. Everybody recognizes that. It's common knowledge. And yet, I cannot believe this. The Secretary of State, the number one diplomat by position anyway in the United States, Marco Rubio, went to Senate testimony last week and was asked specifically about this issue here, about Iran, and I cannot believe his answer.
What happens if the supreme leader is removed in Iran? What happens next?
Well, that's an open question. I mean, no one knows who would take over. Obviously, their system is divided between the supreme leader and the IRGC that responds directly to him. And then you've got these quasi-elected individuals, the ones that wear the suits on television who are part of their political branches, but ultimately have to run everything they do by the supreme leader. So I don't think anyone can give you a simple answer as to what happens next in Iran if the supreme leader and the regime were to fall, other than the hope that there would be some ability to have somebody within their systems that you could work towards a similar transition. I would imagine it would be even far more complex than the one we're describing now, because you're talking about a regime that's in place for a very long time. So that's going to require a lot of careful thinking if that eventuality ever presents itself.
Are you kidding me? Here he is admitting, I don't know. We don't have any idea. You have an armada sitting there right now that is poised and cocked and ready to go. You have people like Jack Keane and Victoria Coates who are advocating strongly. Go and fight. Go and destroy these guys. Don't negotiate. Get them out. Regime change. Trey Gowdy. What's so big deal about regime change? All these folks that are talking, Trump is listening. And then here, you don't even have a plan. That is criminal negligence. And it should have been, everybody should have been up in arms about this. The senator who asked the question should have interrupted him and said, what the literal F? What are you talking? What do you mean you don't know? You have an operation to try and achieve regime change, and you don't even know what comes next? Well, now it could be that's part of the plan. It could be that that's not an oversight. That's even more criminal if that is the case. We're going to get to that in a second. But everybody, fortunately, at least everybody on LA Air, is not all about trying to encourage President Trump to go. There are a few folks who are breathing some realism into this besides us. And that is, we'll start first with Trita Parsi, who brings a little bit of realism into the conversation.
I think the Iranian calculation amongst those who are skeptical about diplomacy is that Trump has an exaggerated view of Iran's current weakness. Clearly, Iran is weaker than it was 2 years ago, but the view in the White House, perhaps informed by efforts by the Israelis, is exaggerated. And as a result, he's driving a maximalist bargain. And he's essentially thinking that through this military mobilization, he will be able to force the Iranians to capitulate. But the thinking on the Iranian side is a small war, not in the sense that it would be symbolic, but one in which the U.S. attacks and the Iranians give an unprecedented response in the region and against U.S. forces, will quickly dispel Trump of any belief he may have had that this could be a quick, glorious victory similar to Venezuela, similar to other military actions that he's taken, and as a result, force Trump to step back and then come back to the negotiating table, but with a much more realistic assessment of what kind of demands he can make and what kind of coercion he can pursue.
See, this gets to the whole issue of what are the two sides thinking. And if you have the two sides thinking one thing on their side, and then they're imputing ideas on the other side that they don't have, you have tremendous opportunity for catastrophic mistake. So you apparently have those on the American side that are thinking, well, either you're just going to give us what we want, those 3 points I've showed you, which no rational person would, but maybe they will if we blow up and kill enough people. Maybe that's what they're thinking. Or we'll get lucky and then we'll have a regime change and we'll kill all the people. We'll just put somebody new in there. And then maybe that will be fine. Maybe they're thinking that. But for the Iranian side, is they're thinking, okay, just look at it from their perspective and to understand. Trita makes some really good points here. I'm going to expand on them a little bit. 2015, they have negotiations with President Obama. They work out this nuclear deal, the JCPOA it was called. And so they have significant curtailments on their nuclear power research projects. They limit how much reprocess potential they can have. They severely restrict how much they can reprocess, et cetera. A lot of the stuff is taken out of the country. They have deals with the European countries there to try to assure it, et cetera. And in exchange for these significant curtailment, they have people on the ground that come into the IAEA, inspectors to validate the things that are being done. And then they get some limited sanctions relief. That was the whole point of it. So the idea was for the Iranian side, if you negotiate in good faith with the United States and with the European allies, then things can settle down and that they can get back to some kind of normality. That's not quite how it happened. Now, the deal was passed, but Obama made a huge tactical error or strategic error in that he knew he couldn't get it past the Senate and the House or the Senate. He couldn't get a treaty done, so he didn't submit it to him. So he basically did it on his own authority. Well, the problem with that, of course, is that the minute he's out of office, the next guy can come in on his authority and just abrogate it, which, of course, is exactly what happened. In May 2018, President Trump came in because he hated anything that had the word Obama on it. And so he got rid of the JCPOA, and all of the constraints that were on Iran vanished. All of our leverage that we had to keep them from ever getting a nuclear weapon went away. And then, of course, over the time, and it didn't happen right away because Iran wanted to stay in it. Iran wanted to have the deal that they agreed to, but we went away from it and never went back to it. Trump promised at the time in 2018 he was going to negotiate a better deal. Remember? I'm going to get a better deal, one that is going to include the ballistic missile program, which Obama didn't, et cetera. Of course, that never happened because you can't get a better deal from our perspective unless you're going to give something better to the other side. And we didn't want to give anything, so nothing ever happened. So the Iranians learned that you can't negotiate in good faith with the United States because unless something passes through Congress, it's not worth the paper it's written on because the next guy comes in can just turn it off. Or if he changes his mind the next day, he can change his mind anyway and get rid of it. So they don't have a lot of confidence in it. But they also recognize that they are on the lower end of the power dynamic. So they have limited flexibility, limited leverage. And so then now they see that over time, the negotiations just don't work. And then, of course, they were in the process of being negotiated with the Trump administration last year when we attacked them. So now then every time they look up, there's negotiations with Trump are going bad. So now then they're faced, as we sit here and speak, with should we capitulate to the Trump administration, give on those 3 terms we mentioned in there, which would completely take their defensive capability away, or do they do something different? And Trita Parsi is suggesting that and this makes logical sense, that they would say, you know what, we're not going to give in this time. We can't go toe to toe with the United States and win and you have a knockout blow. We can't defeat the United States, but we can impose a severe cost. So if you come in and attack us this time, we are going to hit you. And then they calculate, then we'll negotiate from a position where the Americans will recognize the logic of, well, we can't compel them. We can't kill them, with a regime change operation without coming in on the ground. So then the Americans will then negotiate in better faith. That is a foolish thing. Americans won't do that. They'll do the Trump administration will do the opposite. They'll probably double down or increase the firepower. But I can't imagine any scenario where President Trump is going to say, okay, well, after we've suffered enough losses here, I guess we'll negotiate something better. Maybe he will. I don't know. I think it's very unlikely, but that seems to be what the Iranians are ready to risk their lives on, because they've tried the other way and it hasn't worked. Now, if President Trump wants to have a negotiation here where he gives something in order to get something, but where they can, within their own capacity, ensure their national security, meaning they're not going to give certainly not going to give their ballistic missile program away, then we have a chance to avoid any more bloodshed. But the problem is that there's too many people who want to have Iranian blood. They don't want the Iranian side to succeed. They don't want the Mullah regime, the Ayatollah. They don't want their form of government to exist. So they don't want a deal. That's what you need to understand. And they're certainly trying to make that case for President Trump. One of whom is making that is Rebecca Grant, who also went on Fox News and says that, you know what, I don't think that, she says, I don't care what Trita Parsi says there. I think that the Ayatollah is wrong because they don't even have any military power.
Iran is taking a really big risk because Trump's armada ensures that Iran basically has no military options left. And make no mistake, President Trump is ready for action. If they go, we know there's a pre-briefed target set. It's probably ballistic missile sites, maybe leadership targets. But right now, it is the pressure on Iran to agree to negotiations, which is what President Trump says he wants to do. Because you can see on this map, those assets are already in place. This is a massive amount of sea-based air and missile defense. There's also land-based missile defense, too. But you're looking at destroyers in the Eastern Med ready to do a nose-on shot against Iranian missiles or drones. Destroyers down in the Persian Gulf, more destroyers, and the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln over there in the NAG, the North Arabian Gulf. Incredible. This is like a golden dome of missile defense over our U.S. forces.
Okay, so here again, it's another Fox. This is this morning. That's just today. So you see that the relentless pressure on President Trump. Yeah, just keep doing this because they don't have any options. Don't worry about what they may do. They don't have any options. All they can do is die in place if we go in, because we have this incredible amount of power. So she's talking to Trump and saying, look, we have this offensive power that could do incredible things. Look what we've done in the past. And now that we have all this air defense missiles that we've added into the region, so now we have like a golden dome. She's using his terminology. She's definitely talking directly to him and trying to play into his ego. Oh, remember this whole golden dome that's going to have this impervious shield over it. And that's what it's going to be, this massive firepower. I just have to wonder if Victoria Coates and Jack Keane and Rebecca Grant, if they actually have any idea how military power actually works. Recommend they listen to our show that we did a few days back with former British Commodore Steve Jeremy, who went into detail to explain this massive armada that she was talking about and playing up there. If you have a high-intensity conflict, you got 4 or 5 days max, and maybe not even 5 days of combat power. And then what? Your wad is shot. And if you haven't achieved regime change, if you haven't regime collapse, if you haven't caused the people to rise up to act as the ground troops for you, even though they don't have any weapons, then what? Then what are you going to do? You already see that diplomatically, politically, we don't have a plan. We just kind of hope it works, and then we'll just wait and see what happens. That's crazy. And now that she's like saying, President Trump, yeah, you should do it because they can't do anything militarily anyway. They can. They definitely can. The Iranians definitely have that missile. Gary was just showing you that range fan out there that shows all these different missile calibers and categories that they have that can go through all of the air defense that we have, nearly all of them in that area, depending on which missile system is used. We can have some impact on it, but they also have thousands upon thousands of Shahed drones. We haven't even talked about that. Those are just the missiles that we know can get through, but you can also saturate it. And if they're smart, they would, the Iranian side would first saturate the air defense with all these Shahed drones that's going to suck up all these air defense missiles, anti-air capabilities. And then even before you've had a chance to reload, then all of a sudden here comes some missiles, and now you don't have enough. And we don't have enough of the long-range offensive missiles to take everything out. We don't have enough defensive missiles to intercept everything. And if Iran decides to use wave after wave, we're screwed, because even an inadequate amount of air defense capability, if you run out of missiles, then everything is going to get through. If Iran really wants to play its hand in a firm way, they can create tremendous casualties and tremendous damage in both the Israel and U.S. bases in the region here. That's what President Trump needs to understand. And actually, on our own show last week, John Mearsheimer also tried to bring up this point. So everything is not necessarily going in the way of trying to tell President Trump to shoot it. Some other people are saying, listen to this advice.
I think it's quite clear that even with all those military assets, if you strike Iran, it's not going to produce regime change. President Trump has said that what he wants is a decisive strike. That's what he tells us. He wants something decisive. He wants to decisively knock off the regime. You want to remember, he was talking about attacking on the morning of January 14th. The morning of January 14th of this month, he was talking boldly about attacking Iran. By the end of the day, he had cooled his jets. And one of the reasons he had cooled his jets was because the generals told him, his military told him, he couldn't win a decisive victory, even with all the military force we had in the region. So the idea that he's going to go in there, blast Iran with this armada that he now has in place and create regime change, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. And people like Rebecca Grant, who thinks we have all this air defense in the region that's going to protect us, hasn't been paying attention. I mean, all you have to do is look at what happened in the 12-day war last year, and you can see that the best Iron Dome with the THAAD system, with the David Sling, with all the integrated air defense weapons that they had, that we had given them, all the ammunition that we had given them, still all kinds of Iranian missiles got through. And according to most reports that we've seen, some of the best stuff that Iran has wasn't even used. And that in the intermediate time, they have replenished a lot of their stocks. They have continued to build them because they had made their factories underground so that they wouldn't be subject to being destroyed by Israeli or American missiles. So those things have continued to crank. And now you're talking, 6-7 months later, they probably have a lot more capability in there. And of course, they've spread them throughout their country. As Alistair Crook described, and so his contacts have said, listen, they have these things spread out all over the place. A lot of them are underground bunkers. They will come out, they will fire, they'll go back in, and they have what's called a dead hand prospect, to where even if you communications wise or physically take out the leadership in Tehran, they'll still operate out there if the criteria is met, i.e. if they're attacked. So if you think you're going to stop me, you're deceiving yourself. And it seems that they're trying to deceive President Trump by playing to his ego, this whole Golden Dome thing. I'm telling you, if he tries that, it's not going to go well, and he's going to be in a lot of trouble. However, so you have Trita Parsi trying to talk a little bit of sanity. You have John Mearsheimer trying to talk some sanity. You have our show trying to talk the reality, the combat reality on the ground, the pros and the cons and all that. And you've seen now some of these other people, whether it's Jack Keane, Rebecca Grant, Victoria Coates, they're all trying to convince Trump to go with it. But no one, I think, has the influence on President Trump than Lindsey Graham. Do you remember before he attacked in Maduro, when it looked like he might not, President Trump may not, then his golfing buddy there, we unfortunately have to show this too many times, that he listens to him. And Lindsey Graham went out on one of the Fox News shows, I think it was, and said, listen, we have 15% of the American naval military power in the area off Venezuela. If at the end of the day, they go home and Maduro's still in power, it will be a huge error. It will be huge failure for our part, and China and Russia and blah, blah, blah. Everybody will pay attention, etc. Days later, the attack went in. So with that in mind, take a look at what Lindsey Graham is saying now.
I think it's a defining moment in his presidency. Ronald Reagan went to the Berlin Wall and he said, tear down this wall. He didn't say, could you make it lower? When asked about what the protesters should do, President Trump said, keep protesting, help is on the way. If this regime is still standing, the day after, if we pull the plug, will be 100 years of chaos. I have every confidence that President Trump will do what he promised to the people. Help is on the way, keep protesting. If this regime falls, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, they all go. It'd be the biggest change since the fall of the Berlin Wall. But here's one thing I know. Donald Trump is Ronald Reagan plus in my mind. Venezuela, soon Cuba. The one thing you can't do as president, talk like Reagan and act like Obama.
Oh, he had to go there. That's like the poison pill that for President Trump. That's why he got rid of the JCPOA, because it had Obama's name on it. That's the reason why he wants to get rid of Obamacare. He doesn't like that health care plan because it had the word Obama on it. He just hates anything associated with Obama. And now here is Lindsey Graham throwing that ace on the ground. So he said the same thing categorically that he did before Maduro was taken, before we launched that operation here. Had all that firepower just floating off the coast. Now here again, we have all this firepower floating off the coast. We have a bunch of other firepower at various air bases throughout the region. And he says the same kind of thing. If you don't do this, it's going to cause chaos for 100 years. But if you don't do it, you'll be like Obama. Oh, that's the worst. Listen, all these other arguments that are based on realities and fact, and you have the pro-war folks articulating here. You have the Secretary of State admitting we don't really have a plan, so that would seem to mitigate against it. You have John Mearsheimer, the international relations theorist par excellence, Trita Parsi, who has a lot of direct engagement with the Iranian regime, knows it inside and out, can really give some good advice. But Lindsey Graham has that ace. He's number one, he's got his golfing buddy, so he listens to him. And then number two, he's going to try and publicly shame him by saying, you'll be Obama if you don't do this. So Trump's ego being what it is, that could be the decisive factor that pushes him in there. As of today, as of right now, when we're live on the air, there have been no bombs dropped. There's been no attempt at regime change. But listen, President Trump needs to understand he may give in to the pressure for Lindsey Graham, but he's got to understand there will come a cost with this, because what Trita Parsi is explaining about the Iranian mentality is almost certainly right. It would be illogical for them to react anyway, besides what he said, which is to make good on their threat, attack the Americans, attack the Israelis, to make a price and impose a price and a cost on continuing to try and have a regime change. It's not only defense. Then they think maybe they can get a negotiated settlement. Forget about whether that would work or not. That's their mentality here. But then also look domestically, because President Trump needs to understand his base is not for this. This is one of the reasons so many voted for him, is because he said, no more dumb wars. We want to get out of the wars we had. Well, obviously, he hasn't done that. He claims that I've gotten rid of 8 wars. Definitely hasn't done that. People aren't stupid, and some people may buy into it, but a lot of people are looking around going, yeah, I don't see it. And some of the wars he claims to have gotten out wars at all. Some of them he claims are still quite bubbly, especially in the Middle East. He claimed to have brought peace for the first time in 3,000 years, and yet you see very clearly that there is not that, as we're literally on the edge of a war that he's claimed has already ended once, but it never did. But his base is not for this. And if you start another one, and there will be no doubt that this is a war of choice. It's not about American national security. It's not even about nuclear weapons, because you already claimed that you obliterated their nuclear capabilities. So it would be a long time in the future. So there's no threat of that. So you can't use that card again to your base and say, well, we have to for this. Now you're trying to say it's for the protesters. Well, a lot of people in the base say, I don't care about those protesters. I don't care about whatever Iran. That's their deal. Let them figure that out. That's not a reason for us to go to war, because if he takes this course of action and Iran does what it claims, and now all of a sudden Americans are killed in action. They are killed just at their bases, or if airplanes get shot down, or if ships get attacked in the sea, or if the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked, and now all of a sudden the price of oil shoots up through the roof, and you're heading into a midterms. That's the other part here. You need to understand. This could absolutely hand a golden ticket into the hands of the Democrats, because it would, they're already, you look at all the elections that have been held over the last 4 or 5 months, they've all gone in the Democrats' favors. The whole affordability issue is at stake. But now if you add on top of it that Trump went back on his promise, no more dumb wars, and all of a sudden here's a war of choice that has American casualties for no reason. Their lives were sacrificed not in defense of anything, just because you chose to go and attack another country and they responded. That's not going to go over well. And so that's going to even increase even more than is already the case, that there's a blue wave, a wipeout of the Republicans come this coming election in November. For all those, even if you don't care about doing what's right or wrong, if you care about your position politically, don't do this. This would be a huge unforced error. Lindsey Graham says that this could be the defining moment of his presidency. Well, he's right on that. If he takes this action, it will be a defining moment, but not defining in the direction he wants. It will be catastrophic for him politically. And of course, because he's the president of the United States, it will be catastrophic for us too. We'll pay the price for it. Lindsey Graham won't. So it's fine with him. It's no cost for him. Jack Graham won't. Victoria Coates won't. Rebecca Grant, they'll all have their jobs. They'll keep getting paid. Their family members won't die. So it's fine with them. It's easy for them to advocate for that. Not so much for the service members' families, not so much for our service members themselves, not so much for the protesters in Iran that you're advocating could continue to rise up, even though you're going to get slaughtered. No, for the Israeli citizens who will be eating missiles in the teeth that they can't stop all of. They won't be okay with it. And politically, that's going to circle back around President Trump. It could go really bad. So let us hope, because and I can continue to hope, as long as no missiles have been launched and no airplanes have left the carriers, as long as that is the case, we could still hope that sanity will come in, that enough of these voices, and I'm sure there are others inside the administration. I know certain there are some voices that are saying this inside. Hopefully, the logic that they can bring to the table will have its sway, and President Trump can do whatever else he wants to do. I mean, there's any number of ways that he can just avoid not firing and somehow claiming victory. I honestly don't care what he does. However he wants to spin that, let him do it, as long as nobody dies, as long as our interests are not harmed. That's what the most important thing, because that's what I care about above everything. We'll see how it's going to work out. Really appreciate you guys, folks. In about an hour or so from now, a little over an hour, we're going to have Andrei Martyanov back with us. Hadn't had his take in a while. Lots of things going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. Want to bring you up to date on that. And also just from his military perspective, he's got some other comments here that bear commenting on. You want to see that. Thank you. That'll be at 2 o'clock this afternoon on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Thanks very much, folks. We'll see you then. You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.